The stadium lights had already dimmed, the reporters were packing up, and the world thought the night was over. But that was the moment it happened, the quiet sentence from Shohei Ohtani that felt less like a quote and more like a shockwave. A sentence that made grown reporters freeze, made cameras lift again, and made every fan in the room inhale at once, because it wasn't about baseball. It was about purpose. You could almost hear the hum of the empty stadium echoing behind him as he spoke. He wasn't smiling, he wasn't celebrating, he wasn't even talking about his own greatness. Instead, he spoke of something heavier. Something deeper. Something that carried a kind of weight you could only hear from a player who understands legacy. The air shifted when he said it. You could feel it, like someone had opened a door to a story bigger than the game, bigger than the season, bigger than him. Reporters leaned closer without realizing they were moving. It was that kind of moment. Because Shohei Ohtani didn't talk about pressure. He talked about shiming, a mission. A word that in Japanese carries emotion, duty, a kind of spiritual responsibility that goes beyond trophies and stats. It felt like listening to a warrior in a film who finally reveals the truth that's been burning inside his chest all along. And he didn't speak this mission for himself. He spoke it for a legend. A mentor he respected so deeply that the mention of that name carried a tone of reverence rarely heard in modern sports. You could hear the admiration in his voice, the weight of gratitude, the sense that he was carrying something that did not belong to him alone but had been passed down, like a torch. The room went silent, the kind of silence that makes your heartbeat suddenly sound loud. Ohtani looked down for a moment, as if choosing each word carefully, then continued, revealing not just what he owed to the past, but what he believed he owed to the future. It wasn't an answer to a reporter's question, it was a declaration. He spoke of responsibility, of continuing the path carved out by the greats before him, of honoring the sacrifices of a predecessor who made the impossible possible, who stood alone years before Shohei became the global phenomenon he is today. This wasn't hero worship. This was lineage. The way he spoke, you felt the invisible thread connecting generations of players, the ones who lifted Japan on their shoulders, the ones who dared to cross oceans, who endured pressure, doubt, criticism, and cultural expectation. He wasn't just reflecting on their journey, he was acknowledging that his success was built on their courage. And in that moment, Ohtani didn't look like a 500-foot home run machine or a strikeout king. He looked like a student of the game, humbled by those who came before him. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Because sometimes the quietest words hit the hardest. One reporter later said it felt like the room itself breathed differently. Another said they had chills running down their arms. Because no one expected Ohtani, on a night filled with cameras and celebration, to speak not of himself but of legacy. But that's why the world loves him. He never speaks from ego, only from purpose. And tonight, he revealed that his purpose wasn't to become the greatest player alive, but to honor the greatness that made him possible. He mentioned the senior player's name with a calm, profound respect that made even non-Japanese reporters sense the magnitude of that relationship. This wasn't just an idol. This was someone who shaped his worldview, his discipline, his standards. And when he said, "It is my mission," it was as if the entire baseball universe paused. Mission. Shiming. A word that doesn't simply mean something to do. It means something you must do. Something that defines you. Something that, if abandoned, would leave a hole in the story of who you are. And suddenly the night felt different. You realized that the home runs, the strikeouts, the MVPs, those weren't the point. They were only the language through which he expressed that mission. Ohtani continued speaking, and every sentence felt like a reveal. He described how the greats before him carried Japan's name into stadiums around the world long before he ever swung a bat in America. How they endured isolation, cultural barriers, the pressure of representing not just a team but an entire nation. He spoke as someone who understood that he was not merely playing baseball, he was continuing a tradition carved from sacrifice. He wasn't emotional, but his conviction carried emotion for him. You could imagine that great predecessor somewhere watching this moment with pride, the student now carrying the flame higher than anyone imagined possible, yet humble enough to bow to those who lit it first. The story didn't end there. Ohtani went on to describe how much he still feels he has to learn, how much he owes to that legacy. It wasn't performative humility. It was genuine. You could feel that this wasn't a polished media answer, it was a belief shaped by years of mentorship and admiration. He wasn't just representing Japan. He was protecting the legacy of a legend. He wasn't just breaking records. He was fulfilling a mission given to him by those who inspired him long before the world knew his name. And in that darkened stadium hallway, with flashes of leftover camera lights bouncing off the walls, the moment felt almost cinematic. Like the climax of a sports documentary where the hero reveals the truth behind his drive. People talk about Ohtani's skills, his numbers, his speed, his power, but they rarely understand his core. And tonight, for a few seconds, he opened that core to the world. He wasn't chasing greatness. He was carrying it. There is a difference. And that difference is why fans love him, why teammates respect him, why opponents admire him even as he destroys them on the field. Because no matter how high he rises, he never forgets those who lifted him. The interview wrapped up, but the impact didn't. Reporters talked about it long after he left the room. Fans replayed the clip again and again. Headlines spoke of humility, respect, legacy. But those words didn't capture the full truth. The truth was this. Shohei Ohtani reminded the world that greatness is not a destination. It's inheritance. He honored a senior player by placing his own success beneath that legacy, by acknowledging the road paved before him, by showing gratitude not through polite words but through a vow. A vow to continue what others started. A vow to protect the spirit of the game entrusted to him. A vow to fulfill the mission he feels in his bones, quietly, sincerely, relentlessly. And as the lights finally shut off and the stadium fell silent for real this time, that single word, mission, lingered in the air like a promise. A promise that greatness is not just talent. Greatness is responsibility. And Shohei Ohtani, he carries it with a grace the world will remember long after the numbers fade, long after the seasons end, long after the cheers quiet. Because missions don't end, they live on. Through players like him. And through the legends who inspired them.